and welcome to another video. So this was going to be all of my pickups for the last half of March, and this video will probably be quite short comparative to my other videos just because there's not not nearly as much as I have had in previous videos. It's very small amount this month, but hopefully still somewhat interesting. And rather than spend too much time on this intro, I'll just get straight into it. Now, the first thing I got this month, or the first thing I got for this last 2 weeks of March, is something I was sort of debating with myself on buying, just because I didn't want the actual item itself, but the extras that it came with. So if you've watched my videos before, you know that I'm not really someone who picks up Japanese manga. I find it somewhat counterproductive, considering I don't, I can't actually read Japanese, so I don't really like having books that are basically useless to me. I mean, of course, they're not useless, and if I ever wanted to learn Japanese at any point and then sort of improve my reading, they would probably be helpful in that respect, but that's not really a plan for my future. But so this is actually a Japanese volume, but I bought it for the extra that it came with, and that is volume 9 of the special edition of Devil's Line by Ryo Hanada, and as you can see on the obi, it says Devil's Line Artworks, and that was the little extra that it came with. So the book itself is fairly standard, normal trim size for Japanese tankobon, but the art book itself is like so. It's very small and thin, pretty much standard for this sort of manga inclusive extra. So it's probably 20 pages and just various artwork of generally the main characters from the series. I'm a big fan of Hanada's artwork. I think it's very beautiful. So the value of this extra in comparison to the overall price of the manga was not a deal breaker for me, and I did really want this. I was quite excited from when it was initially announced to when I got it in the mail. But yeah, it's just a nice little extra, one that's good for fans of the series. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everyone because I don't think that everyone could justify paying the cost plus shipping for a Japanese volume just for a book like this, unless you're someone who also likes to buy Japanese volumes of manga. But for me, I had no problem spending the money. The next item is actually another art book, but this is what I would call a proper art book. It's not a little extra that came with anything. But that is Kumata Hiroko's art book. The artist who is probably most well known for Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju, one of my favorite series of recent months, and really of the past year or so. And she also did the artwork for I don't know, there's no anime for it, but she does the artwork and character designs and things for Fune wo Amu, or The Great Passage as it's known in English. And that is this art book here. As you can see, it's got Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju on the front here with Kiku. And this art book is absolutely gorgeous. Just the colors. I really love her character designs. Yeah, I really was looking for this. I found out about it a little bit later than when it came out, so it was quite hard to actually find a copy of this, but I tracked one down on eBay, so luckily I didn't have to pay too much more for it. But it is definitely worth the money, especially if you're a fan. I cannot wait for Descending Stories, or Rakugo Shinju, to get the English release of the manga that it will be getting in the next couple months. I think volume 1 comes out in May. Yeah, I am really, really looking forward to that. But as you can see, her artwork, definitely, her characters have very distinct design, and the setting is very, just, very Japanese and very sort of down to earth. It's very realistic sort of art style because she tells very realistic stories. But yes, that was the art book that I got for this, I think this month in its entirety. But yes, absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous book. One that it took a really long time to get to me via shipping, so I was really waiting for it for a very long time. But now that I have it, it definitely fits in with the rest of my art books, all of which I adore. So yes, that was that. And then next is the very, very few manga that I got for these weeks, and there's only 2 actually. The first one being somewhat predictably probably volume 11 of the collector's edition of Fruits Basket. We've stopped getting characters from the actual Zodiac on these covers since volume 8, but of course if you're familiar with the series, you will recognize these characters. They're a little bit spoilery, so I'm not going to actually say who they are, but this is the second last volume in this omnibus re-release. From what I've heard, the 12th and final volume is the 23rd volume, which is the final volume of the series, plus extra, just extra material. I don't know what exactly that entails, whether it's interviews or, sketches or whatever. I don't know. But this is pretty much the climax and the ending of the series. Only one more book till it's all over, which will be coming in about 3 weeks. And Yen, as I've said before, has done a beautiful job on these re-releases. It's definitely the series that deserves its high accolades, and one that I know a lot of people were very, very, very happy about being relicensed and re-released, including myself, of course. I did previously own the Changyi release of Fruits Basket, which used to be a publishing company here in Australia and Singapore. They're actually a Singaporean company, but a lot of Australia's manga releases at the time came from Changyi. But in my personal opinion, I don't think the translation was as good, and the volumes themselves were sort of hard to read. They were very tightly bound, and although the paper quality was very, very, very good and the actual release was very stylish, it mimicked the Japanese release a lot. I find these ones overall nicer. I think just the larger format, the color pages, just the ease of reading it has been a much nicer way. I have never had any experience with the Tokyo Pop releases of this, but I know it is one of their, or was one of their more well put together releases because it was so popular and had such a high reputation. But either way, I definitely recommend this series to people who aren't really, I mean, I recommend it to everyone, but especially to people who maybe want to try a shoujo and haven't really found anything that they super love yet. It's got romantic elements to it, but it would be a disservice to say that it's purely a romance story. It's definitely, I mean, Takia is sort of well known for her dramatic storytelling, and Fruits Basket, I think, is her magnum opus in that regard. Um, yeah, it's a wild ride going from, the first volume to the 23rd volume. Um, but yes, Fruits Basket, I say it every time that I get a new volume. It's great. Definitely recommend it. And it's been wonderful rereading it. It's a lot of fun. It's fun. It's funny. It's got good drama. It's got very, very likable characters and a very sort of tragic setting. It doesn't get too heavy-handed with the tragic nature of itself, but it does it very, very, very well. I have just recently been rereading the entire series yet again, sort of in preparation for the last book to come out. And I forget how much I love these characters. They really are, you really do feel, you feel very raw emotions towards hopefully most of the characters. I would say for me personally, Momiji was early on, his introduction and then how his development throughout the series goes is one of the most heartbreaking, but of course that could be said about literally every single character, or at least Zodiac character within this series. Um, Hattori, Kyo, of course, and Yuki, of course. But Kisei, Rin or Isuzu, just really everyone. I don't know. I just implore people to try it because it is a lot more than I think the cutesy look of it gives off. I mean, this cover in particular isn't exactly cutesy, but sort of the style of the series hides the darker tone of it that is throughout the entire series, but maybe a little bit ambiguous early on. But yes, that was volume 11 of Fruits Basket, and the final manga that I got for this pickup is another one that is very dark in tone. Honestly, a lot darker. Well, no, not necessarily a lot darker, but it's a different sort of dark. It's very brutal. And this is a volume 1 of a series that I have heard good things about for a very, very, very long time. And when I say that, I mean literally years. Having read this first volume, I'm certainly intrigued. It gives me very distinct feelings of Mars, which is a series I just recently read and completed. The art style especially, is very, very evocative of Mars. But also Banana Fish, which is a series I don't think is that well known, and it's one that I would die to get, but unfortunately it is incredibly out of print everywhere. But that is volume 1 of Let Die by Suyeon Won. Suyeon Won. And as you can probably tell, this is a manhwa series. It's actually a shonenai, sort of light BL series. Pardon me. And it's published by Netcomics, of which I've only ever read Land of the Silver Rain by them, and Intense, which is a series I highly, highly recommend. But Let Die is sort of, I believe from what I have read, like summaries or of the series is set in a somewhat futuristic Seoul, capital of South Korea, um, and is sort of this tragic and brutal meeting of two young men. One who's sort of the perfect high school student. He's very kind, very charming, has a sweet relationship with his girlfriend. And then this other young man who's sort of the leader of a notorious gang within the area. Die, of which the title is referring to. I'll show you the back. This gets very, it sort of reminds me a lot of Mars in that it's a very troubled relationship. I wouldn't, and especially with Dai, he is very, at this point, almost sociopathic, but also somewhat charming. You can understand how they're drawn together, or how, Juyeon? Jae-hee. Jae-hee is somewhat attracted or enamored with this extremely violent, but charming and somewhat understandable young man. It sort of teeters between the two very much. So it's got a lot of that quality in which you can see, like, okay, this is an interesting dynamic. They've definitely got they've got a lot of chemistry together, but you can see how one is sort of drawn to the other, or really drawn to each other. But it balances that with a lot of violence, a lot of brutal violence, a incredibly brutal initiation sequence, as well as later on a very brutal. We never see anything, but pretty obvious sexual assault, which I think works in some series, and in this series it does work. It definitely is very like it. I wouldn't recommend this to anyone who's looking for a fluffy, happy relationship. But if you are familiar with Mars insofar as like a very broken protagonist, or morally ambiguous protagonist, maybe is a better term, that has their own demons, and things like Banana Fish, where it is a very brutal setting. The gangs in any culture, not going to be a great time. But in saying that, and I think I'll show you some artwork and what I mean. It is very, the artwork reminds me a lot of Mars. Especially with the motorcycle and the bad boy and all the other, but as you can see, it is quite violent, sort of throughout the entirety of it. It's very interesting. Like I said, I've heard very good things about this series, especially from people who are like, oh, well, it's not your typical BL, and it's not, it's a very intriguing story, and I don't know whether it's ultimately tragic, but it is definitely, even this early on in the story, you can tell there's definitely a lot of tragedy running through it. In saying that, I will probably be reading more. I am very intrigued with this series. I don't necessarily think it's one of those series that I could recommend as, or in the same vein as some BL, which is like, oh, it's sweet, and it's a good relationship, and this is how people actually interact with each other. It's much more so, just intriguing, and overall, just very, very fascinating, interesting character dynamics, and one that really, like, as far as sort of not appalled, but like just shocked and almost horrified you are about it. It's very compelling. And this is a very long series. I think it's like 15 volumes, but I believe it's fairly popular for net comics. It's one of their more popular series. And like I said, it's got a very good reputation. So I am interested in reading more. But yeah, that is literally everything that I got for this month. So very few actual releases. But thank you all so much for watching. Yeah, I don't know when the next video will be, but hopefully soonish. And yeah, bye till then. Thanks, guys.